Hey patrons, welcome back to the second part in this tutorial series. In this part we're going to be carrying on by working on the actual robin in this part. So the first thing that I'm doing with the robin is I'm just going in with a little bit of black paint, and I'm just using it to paint in the darkest part of the robin, which is the two eyes. So I'm just going in with my really small round brush and just some black paint. You can mix in a bit of purple so it's not just flat black. And obviously you can see I'm using a very dark concentration of this, not too much water at all. Just enough water to get the paint to flow nicely on the paper. And I'm just focusing on painting in the eyes, leaving free or any highlights in the eyes. I'm just leaving that free of any paint for now. Just leaving them white. Also, the beak is quite dark, so I'm just getting in a little bit of the beak. Because we're looking at it from a front view, we can't see too much of the beak. And because I want to keep this painting quite loose, I don't want to include lots of detail in the bird. So I'm just using that same mixture of paint just to go in and do the darkest parts of the beak. You can see at the top of the beak there is a highlight, which I'm keeping free of any paint as well. Just next to either side of the beak, just under the eyes, you can see that there is a shadow on either side. So I'm starting off with a nice light dilution of purple, and I'm just going in and just blocking in where that main shadow is around the beak. It's like an upside down V shape with a sort of line in the middle. It's like an M. I'm also adding just a little bit of purple to the shadows within the body of the robin. And just connecting that with the eye. If you want to lift up any of the paint, if you feel like you've added too much, then just clean off your brush and dry it out on a bit of tissue, and then just dab that over the area where you want to lift up some of the colour. Now let's start working on the part of the body that is very orange toned. So I'm starting off with a very light layer of orange. This is more of a red toned orange, and I'm just basically blocking in the part of the body that's orange. So you can see that I'm practically just going over all of the orange parts of the feathers for the robin, just with a very light layer of this. And then because the surface will still be wet, we'll be able to drop in other colours, more intense oranges, and get that nice wet and wet look. You can see that I'm starting off with very light washes. I then picked up that colour that we used before on our branch, so that warm reddish, that terracotta colour, and I mixed in a bit of orange, and I'm just using that, just pure orange now, just to block in and get in some of those more intense orange tones. So I'm just looking at the reference, and really I'm just filling this in all throughout the orange feathers. I'm loosely getting in the sort of direction the feathers are going in and the way they're falling and curving, but like I said, I don't want to get in too much detail, especially at this stage. It's all about just blocking in colours. And when I'm doing my loose watercolour animals, like I mentioned in the last part, I'm not trying to make the colours really realistic to the reference. I like to use really bright colours. For example, if it's got orangey fur, I'm going to get in bright oranges, red tones, yellow tones as well. I'm not going to keep it really realistic. I want it to be nice and bright and vibrant. So now that we've blocked in that orange tone, I'm going to start to work on the shadows by going in with our terracotta colour. This is like a burnt ochre colour, and I'm just using this and dotting this for the shadowed parts of the bird. So you can see on the bird's body that there are certain shadowed areas, so it is important to get the shadows and highlights in the right place in order to get the correct anatomy for the bird. For the really darkest shadows, I'm going in with a more intense concentration of that colour. And if you want a more intense concentration of a certain colour, just add less water. And because we're using the wet on wet method, you don't really have to try and blend this out yourself. Because it's on a wet surface, it will nicely bleed into all of the colours on its own. Sometimes overblending can lead you to having a more rigid, unnatural look. Whereas just letting the colours do their sort of magic and flow into each other gives a more natural flow to the paint. As you can see, I've got a more intense concentration, and I'm creating a few little strokes when I'm applying the paint to the paper to indicate the direction of the feathers and the way the feathers curve around the body. But it's all about just creating sort of an impression. So an impression of the direction the feathers are going in. Not creating lots of detail, but just giving the idea so that we know the sort of way the feathers are laying down. Still using that small brush, I'm adding a more concentrated version of that terracotta just around the beak and around the eyes. And just below the beak as well. If you don't want the colours to bleed out as much, wait for it to dry for a little bit and then go in and drop in the colours. The wetter the paper is, the more the colours are going to flow and bleed into each other. So if you want more control over where the paint is going, simply wait for it to dry a bit. As you can see, I've now got a very thick concentration of that paint, that same colour, and I'm just going to add that into the darkest parts of this robin. I do like to get in dark, intense colours as well to make sure that the robin has a little bit of depth to it. So the darkest parts of the bird is around by the eyes and the beak. So you'll see me keep going over that area. And to the sides of the bird as well. And you can see me adding these little strokes. And because it's a wet sort of surface, the strokes are going to soften out. So it'll give a nice illusion of the direction the feathers are going out, but it's going in, but it's really going to soften it out. So they really do look like they're bleeding into the surface, so it's not going to be harsh lines. Just blending some of that shadowed colour down into the side of the robin. And I'm just going to tap a bit more of our concentrated orange tone onto the body. I'm tapping in more like of a water, more diluted version of the paint, and because something's got more water, it's gonna mean that the paint goes to the areas that have more water, I believe, and so you get those little cauliflower effects, which I quite like, and I like to create in my paintings. So I'm going in with a clean brush now, and I'm just lifting up some of the paint for any of the areas that I want to have highlights. So I showed this technique in the first part, and I go in with a clean wet brush and I just go in, and because it's pretty dry and it is clean, it will lift up some of that paint. You want it to be damp though, you don't really want a dry brush. I like it to be a little bit wet. Just in case the paint has dried a little bit, the wetness will help reactivate it. Now I'm going in with a very light wash of a purpley grey tone, so a very muted purple, and I'm just going to wash this on the outer edge of the body of the robin. You can see the middle of the robin is very orange toned, and then next to it we also have feathers that are more purpley, blue and grey tone. They are more grey in the reference, but I wanted to add some more vibrant colours. Also, the wing of the birds are the darkest part. So I'm adding more intense purples in that area, And once again, I'm adding brush strokes that are going sort of with the direction that the feathers are curving around the bird. I'm also mixing some blue into that, adding a variety of colours. And I'm going to continue to repeat that process on the other side, just adding a very dilute layer of that colour to just block in the colours around the bird. If you touch this to the orange paint, then it will bleed slightly. If you don't want that to happen, then don't connect these areas. And the more water you have, the more it's going to bleed into each other. As you can see, I'm also dropping in some more intense blues. And as I keep saying, I don't use realistic colours. I do like to make it nice and colourful. And I'm just going to fill in the bottom of the bird. Just drag these colours over and connect them. It's quite highlighted towards the centre. The top of the bird's head is also this shade of grey purple. So I'm just pre-wetting the area and then I'll drop in those colours in a second. And because it's wet, they just nicely flow onto the paper and bleed into each other without any harsh edges. I'm getting in some more intense purple onto the side of the bird and adding a few brush strokes going towards the middle to help tie it all in together. I'm now going to work on blocking in the legs, and they're just very thin, so I'm going in with a very weak dilution of the purple, purpley grey, and I'm just sketching in the leg and the 4 little toes, feet, claws, the 4 little claws. Doing the same with the feet on the other side, and the leg is very thin. And I do want to make it look like it's merging in with the branch, so I'm bleeding some colours over the branch and over the feet. And I just kind of wanted to get in where they are. Of course, we're going to be darkening them up later on. I just like to get them in and block them in. I'm dropping in some darker values on the wing on the left hand side, which again I said the wings were the darkest parts in the reference. So I just want to get that in. And because everything's quite light, we do need to start dropping in a few darker colours. Some darker purples. I will be adding a few splatters around the bird as well later on. I'm adding some more water to the centre part of the bird. And like I said, when you wet it, it means that it's easier then to lift the paint. So I then wanted to go in with a tissue and create some brighter highlights to add more contrast within the robin. I felt like I wanted to make some of the highlights a little bit brighter. I'm now going back to the outer part of the bird. I'm also incorporating some warm orangey tones into our greyish portion of the bird. I do like to incorporate and overlap colours, especially when I'm doing a looser painting. So because the middle of his body, his chest, is very orange toned, I wanted to incorporate a few oranges even in the rest of the body, the rest of the very grey, bluey purple toned feathers. Dropping in some more intense blues as well. And following my brush strokes around the shape of the body. Once again, using the technique with my brush to lift up some of that paint to create some highlights. So now I'm mixing up a darker tone using purple and black, and I'm just going to use this on the wings because we need to make sure they are dark enough. They are the darkest parts of the feathers, apart from the eyes, so it's important to make them nice and dark. And I'm also dropping in some of these darker values throughout the body, particularly on the outside of the bird. Once again, just to give more of a contrast to the bird, so that not everything is so light. I also am adding a little bit more of that just around the beak and on the eyes. I'm adding a bit more shadow underneath the eyes, using our terracotta colour. And now I'm going to start to darken up the legs and the feet. Just using that same colour we used for the wing. And as you can see, I'm being quite sketchy with it and just focusing on the darkest parts of the legs and the feet of the bird. I'm not just adding a line everywhere, I am just targeting this paint on certain shadowed aspects of the legs and feet. And I kept my lines a little bit sketchy and crooked just to give it more of a natural look, because the feet aren't just straight, there's a little bit of a jagged look to them. Once again, lifting up some highlights. And then just using my tissue just to brighten it up even more. You can just see how much that colour is removed from the paper. I'm filling in some of the area where I didn't really want to remove colour from, just with a little bit of yellow mixed in with some orange. Remember, you don't have to use the exact colours that I'm using. Especially with this type of painting, you could use any colours you wanted. Any yellows, oranges, reds. I want to darken up the top of the head a little bit. It's looking very light. So I want to just add a darker layer of that blue-grey and purple mix just to the top of the head, particularly around the outer edge. It's going to be lightest in the centre. Mixing up a darker version of that, a more concentrated version with less water, and like I said, just targeting it on either side and on the top of the head, leaving a little portion highlighted towards the centre. You can see that we need to add a lot more shadow to the beak, but if I was to do this whilst it was wet, then all of the dark tones, the dark purples and blacks are all just going to bleed into our yellow tones and make them less vibrant. So I'm going to wait for it to dry before I start to go in and add any like dark tones around the actual beak. I am lifting up some more highlights using that exact same technique. Just looking at the reference, looking at any areas that are lightest throughout the robin's body. And I really did want to focus on getting a good contrast in this piece. So that means that I really did want to make sure that I had some white areas left out, that not every part of the robin had colour on it. I feel like when you leave certain areas white, it really does help make the image pop. And I really like seeing that in other watercolour artworks as well. That's just a style that I like. I'm just highlighting the centre as well, where that grey blue feathers meets with the chest, the warm toned feathers. I'm just softening up the edges by adding a few little feathered strokes. Now I'm going in with some darker, more concentrated purple, mixing it in with a little bit of black and targeting that on the outer edge of the bird. Also bringing that a little bit in the centre, just so that it's not all highlighted. I do want to add a variety, so I'm just adding some darker brush strokes even in the highlighted areas of the feathers at the bottom of the bird. Just continue to do that on the other side as well. And I really love how cute this little guy is looking already. Now I'm going underneath the eye and I'm just going in with a little bit of our purple colour that we've been using for the feathers, and I'm just bringing that underneath the eye on the right hand side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the left hand side, underneath the eye, going towards the side of the body. You can see I'm overlapping it with the orangey feathers as well, just to tie it all in together so there's not such a harsh cut-off point. Added some blues to make it a little more vibrant, a little more colourful, dropping them onto the head as well of the bird. And I do like to keep dropping in more colours just to keep it nice and vibrant. So make sure you're adding colourful purples and blues throughout the feathers and colourful oranges and yellows throughout the chest of the bird as well. So I'm adding a very concentrated consistency of the purple and black to the wings and to the top of the head and underneath the eyes. Just got a clean brush and I'm just fixing that so it's not so intense. Now I'm going in with our terracotta colour again, and I'm just using that to go over some of the shadows within the chest of the bird. So just under the beak there's that shadow, and also just to the sides of the beak, like I said, in that M sort of shape, and also curving around the eyes. Just keep dropping more and more of that colour in, just to keep darkening it up to make it as dark as you want it to be. I'm also just adding a light wash of orange just onto some of those highlighted areas. And just pulling up a few more highlights, going in lines with the direction that the feathers would be going in. Just to add a bit more detail to the area. Keep layering those darker colours as well. And like I said, we're focusing the darkest colours on the outer edge of the body. It's lightest in the middle, and then around the edge of the body is where I'm adding the darker shadows. Now I'm adding a bit more of a grey blue tone. And I'm diluting a bit more of that so it's a little bit stronger but not quite so concentrated. Just dropping that in the edge as well. It's important to keep pausing and looking at your reference image to sort of evaluate and compare, see what shadows you've missed out. Have you got to add any more important shadows in? Is something too dark, too light? Remember, we're not trying to like photocopy it, but we do want the anatomy to be correct and all of that stuff. It's also important not to overwork this too much. If I'm honest, I think I probably preferred it how it was like 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. At this point. That's fine. It's all a learning process. No matter how long you've been doing it for, you're always going to learn things or wish you could change things. So I'm just adding in little bits of water because I do like to create those cauliflower effects that I was talking about. And to do that, literally just get some clean water on your brush and just dot it into any areas like you can see me doing now. Especially darkest areas is where you're going to see the most difference. And you can see already I just put it into the darkest shadow around the body. And it really just makes it give those starry effects. I love it. I think it looks so good. And this could be something that people try and avoid and they don't like if they're trying to get a really smooth gradient. But it also can be a really cool technique and give some really cool effects if you want that sort of look. And I really do like it. Adding some more blue tones to give it more vibrancy. And also I've got a clean brush and I'm just teasing the edge of that bird into the background to help give a really loose edge and to help blur it into the background. Some edges are going to be nice and clean and harsh, and then others are going to bleed out more. And I like doing that with my loose watercolours. I like there being a mixture of harsh edges and then really loose bled out edges. Just adding a few little splatters and dotting in some more of that purple. To create the splatters, tap on the back of the paintbrush. And now I like the way it's looking after we've added in those water drops. So as you can see, I waited for that whole thing to dry. It does lighten it up a little bit. And now we're going to go in and I'm going to start to add in all of the details now. So for example, like I said, we need to darken up around the beak area. And I just want to add some more details, for example, to the legs and the feet. But I've let the whole thing dry. You can see how the background is looking now. I'm going in with a mix now of our terracotta colour, some black and purple, and I'm just using that to start to add the details for the beak. As you can see, we have preserved that highlight for the beak, so I'm going around that, and because it's nice and dry now, we're not going to have anything bleed out. So if you want to get any crisp edges or details, then make sure you're waiting for your painting to dry before you actually go and add them. Otherwise, if it's wet, it's all just going to bleed out into each other. So I'm just working my way around the beak. I'm just adding a little bit of shadow to the side of the eye as well, and just above the beak. And I'm keeping it all quite loose, like there's no real detail there. I'm just like indicating where the beak is. I'm also spreading a little bit of that shadow just below the beak onto the chest of the bird. Just going to add an even more concentrated bit of this colour just to the side of the beak. And on the other side of the beak. And it's starting to give the head a little bit more dimension to it, more structure. So now I'm going in with a little bit of black. And I'm just going to go over the eyes. You can mix in a little bit of purple or blue with this. But I'm just going over, and I just want to clean up the shape of the eyes and just darken it up a little bit. For example, on the right hand side, the eye got a little bit of water in it, so it lightened it up. So just to finish it off, I just want to go over it with a little bit more black, just to make sure it's nice and dark and the eyes stand out. I'm still leaving that little bit of highlight for each eye, and I'm just leaving that white and not adding any paint to it in order to make it the brightest highlight possible. I'm also pulling some of that black around the beak as well, just directly around that highlight, and going over to the sides that are curving down by the eye. Also darkening up the wings, because like I said, the wings were the darkest parts of the robin as well as the eyes. Now I'm getting some of that purple tone and I'm adding that around the beak as well, just so that it's not so black, to add in some other colours. I added a bit of water to create more of a dilution, and I'm going to use that to blend some of these shadows further downwards. So I'm cleaning my brush, and like I said, I'm just teasing the edges of that shadow so that it's not just really shadowed and then really light. I wanted to create some sort of transition from those really dark shadows into the lighter chest of the bird. You can see that it's a much nicer transition, and now I'm going to do the same thing on our other side here. I think it looks really nice mixing some of that purple in with the orangey tones of the chest. I think it works really nicely together. Just going over the pupils a bit more, over the eyes. And I'm going in with some of those darker colours, and because this is the detail stage, I am going and starting to get in a few details on the feathers. Like I said, we're not going to be adding all of the details. It's just to kind of indicate the texture of the animal. So because the bird has obviously got feathers, I want to create a little bit of a feathery texture. So I just create a few little brush strokes just to actually indicate that there are feathers on the bird. You don't have to go overboard with this, otherwise you'll lose the actual watercolour textures and effects coming through. If you just add lots of lines, then you're gonna miss out on all of the bleeding watercolors and all of the colours mixing into each other. So just add an indication of the feather texture. Now I'm getting a more golden tone, and I'm just going to use my very small paintbrush just to add a little bit of feather just under the shadows that we've just created. And I'm using this to create shadows within our yellow orangey chest area. So this colour is something like a yellow ochre type of colour. And remember, as this dries, it will go slightly lighter, which means that the lines will be more subtle. I'm also going in with darker tones, for example, add terracotta and orange tones, and just repeating the same process, just adding the odd brushstroke here and there to indicate the look of feathers and the direction they're going in. Just darkening up the beak area and the eyes very much in the same way where we did the branch, where we kept going over it in layers and building up those shadows. As we can see it drying and we can see it lightening up, we can then judge whether we need to go darker. I'm really going to connect the shadow around, going around the eyes. So I'm just going to continue to work on that shadow. Now I'm going in with some darker purples, and I'm using that to darken up the head of the bird. So it's all very much one tone at the moment, so I want to darken up the sides of the head and also the top as well. And we're also going to darken up just the sides of the bird. Just around the bottom of the robin. And we also want to work on darkening up the legs as well, because at the moment you can't really see them. We can just about see the ghost of where they're meant to be. So I'm going in with my purple black mixture, and I'm just going in and getting in the shadows for the leg and for the feet. And like I said, I do it in very jerky lines to give more of a crooked look to the legs. And when I'm doing each of the little claws, the toes, I'm going in and I'm just focusing on the darkest parts. And for the highlights, I'm just going to leave that initial layer of watercolour. I'm going to let that shine through. I'm going in with a darker version of the colour now with less water. And I'm just going over those areas, over the darkest points, and just dropping that colour in to create some more intense shadows. And I'm just going to go through and repeat that process on the other foot as well. Now I'm just adding a very weak dilution of blue, and I'm just adding that by the wing just to make it look a bit more vibrant, a bit more colourful. And I'm going to go ahead and add a few splatters using the blue mixed with like a purpley tone as well. I will be adding a lot more splatters around the bird and the background later on. Going to add a little bit of pink just under the bird, just pre-wetting it, and then I'm just going to drop in and tap in a little bit of pink. I find that pink looks really nice next to purple, so I'm just going to bleed those colours together and also add a few little splatters. So I wet around the side of the body and then simply tap in the pink. I'm now going to start to work on the flowers and literally just go in a little bit with some really concentrated versions of our pink and purple mixed together, not much water at all, and I'm really just focusing on getting any details that I want to into the background. So I'm focusing on the darkest areas of our main flower at the end of this branch, and I'm just focusing on getting a few of the little shadows in. There's not too much shadow in this, just at the bottoms of the petals. And like I said, I'm just going to go in with my pinks and purples and just drop them in, and I'm also going to be adding a few splatters as well. Now I want to start to work on the bird again, and I want to get in a few more vibrant colours like some more yellows and oranges just onto the chest of the bird. So I'm going to start by adding a few more splatters, and as you can see I'm just going to drop in a few little bits of yellow just to make the chest really pop and look really nice and colourful. I felt like it was lacking a little bit of saturation and vibrancy there. So just wanted to add a little bit of yellows and oranges just around sort of the darker parts of the bird. You can see that I'm leaving the centre quite light. And I'm also just adding some oranges overlapping the shadows as well. I'm just going to finish off the bird by adding any more shadows that I need to, for example around the sides of the body, and I'm literally going to be using the same colours that I've been using throughout this whole time. I'm not really going to be mixing any more colours, just the same colours that we've been using, just adding more concentrated versions of them. So anyway guys, that is it for this second part and for the bird, and we've basically got everything blocked in, but the last thing that I want to do is I want to start to go in and add in some of the highlights, and I like to do this using gouache. So I thought in the next part I'll go through, you know, how to use gouache, different sort of techniques when using gouache, and how to create some really nice highlights and to make this pop even more. So I'll see you in the next part. Bye everybody.